should, no, we'll have to talk about Titane. Hi, this is a video where I'm going to talk at some length about the themes and ideas that are in the Julia Ducournau film from 2021, Titane. This is the follow-up to her only other real feature film, which is Raw, which was released in 2016, which featured as pretty much my release of the year. It was the first time watch for me last year. I loved the ideas in the filmmaking. I loved the way that the whole themes were approached, and that the story that appeared to be of a sort of horror theme actually was so much more when I went to dive into it. So with that in mind, I'm assuming that most people that have clicked on the video like this have seen Titane. But for those that haven't and are maybe looking for a recommendation or otherwise, I don't know. Actually, Titane is a challenging film, but it is full of lots of themes and lots of ideas in it that you don't normally see in other films. So if you like deep, thought-provoking films that have an element of shock horror in them, or scenes that are very, very challenging to watch, then Titane is probably something you'll be interested in. If you're revolted and are put off by, visually challenging or shocking scenes that are very much meant to provoke, then Titane is probably one to avoid for you. And that's not a judgment call to say that people should be one or the other, but more, it is very challenging to watch. So I thought no better place to start for this than actually talk about the description of Titane, because Titane in a short encapsulation is quite hard to describe, and I thought it was kind of hilarious that when I went on IMDb or Letterboxd or any of those things and tried to find out what way they were describing it in the short blurb, that actually they didn't do a very good job of it either. Their definition and story of Titane was: following a series of unexplained crimes, a father is reunited with a son who's been missing for 10 years. I mean, that's not really what Titane's about, although it definitely forms part of the plot that's in there. So I'm going to try my best to give you a summary of what the premise of the film is. It starts a while back with a daughter in a car with her father, and she's basically kicking the backseat of the father, distracting him while he's trying to concentrate and drive. And the scene escalates to the point that the father gets more and more frustrated and turns around to scold the child to turn it off, and in the act of doing so, the car crashes. We jump forward a bit, and the child is getting treatment, assuming for injuries in the accident, and she's getting that titanium plate put in her head. And that's pretty much the last we see of her with her parents, because even just before the flash and cut start, you see that the young girl shuns or recoils from her parents and is much more attracted to the machine with which her problems started. And we jump forward in time, and she's somewhat of a showgirl for the car scene of the automobile industry, where she walk around showing off and parading around in these car shows, etc. And this is where, I mean, you just have to go into spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen Titane and you don't want to know what happens, certainly stop watching now, go and watch it. Although I will say, it is a film where you can know what happens, I think, and still be looking out for it, because I think Ducournau's films, while very lucid and violent in some ways, and I mean violent in filmmaking, not just in the actions that happen on the screen, but in the way that she approaches her subject matter, it's much more about the themes and the ideas and the things that are trying to be said within the film. And I'm maybe horribly wrong with an awful lot of what I'm going to say, but this is what I took from the film, and whether it's right or wrong or accepted right and wrong, it's what I seen when I went on there, and it's stuff I think that bears discussion. So we have a character here that's female, that is in this, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the automobile industry or the automobile world is very male dominated in general in society. Now, it isn't really represented particularly that way in the film, but I think that's a societal norm. And she exists in this world, and as I say, she has eschewed or shunned a lot of personal relationships in the past, and this seems to continue. And we have a scene quite early on where she is approached by a man who's interested in her, and she shuns him, but he doesn't take no for an answer and leans in and forces himself on her, and she murders him. She takes two sticks out there, tying her up, stabs him through the ears. It's gruesome. But it only sets up the start of the trail of where she basically is serial killer for all intents and purposes. And she goes on the run. And in order to go on the run, she decides to disguise herself. In fact, she tries to change herself into somebody else. And that somebody else isn't female, but male. She breaks her nose, she cuts her hair, and has this representation of her that is very unlike that of before. And in doing so gets taken in by this man who is a firefighter, leads a fire team, whose son went missing very much earlier on in his life, and he decides to take in this person as his long lost son. And the film begins anew from there. Now, there's a couple of problems here, obviously. This isn't his son, this is a female. And not only is it a female, but it's a female who's pregnant. Somehow, our main character has gotten pregnant by having sex with a car. Now, the car sex scenes, I think, are unnecessary. I mean, again, it's the shock horror value of it to kind of maybe explain some of the themes that come later on. But I ultimately think they ring so long in the film throughout it that it kind of distracts from what the film is ultimately trying to say further on down. I mean, it's very violent sex scene. It's not like a lovemaking scene by any stretch of the imagination. And therefore is quite challenging. We have this character taken in by this male. Now, this male is somebody that obviously has been very physically imposing their whole lives, and I have to admit that I didn't know until later. He just seemed to be injecting himself all the time. And initially I didn't know what for, but it seems it was about steroids and keeping himself a powerful, physical being of a man. And yet, for all his physicality, he has a very hollow core. This death of his son, or the loss of his son, you can see the hollow core that he has. For all the physicality, for all the maleness and the male hormones that he exudes, he has the respect of all these other men that are around him. He is still yearning for connection and for people and for that connection with his own flesh and blood. And he bestows it on this new person in his life. And I think there's something that can be said from both sides about this, in that we have this female character that has made themselves kind of androgynous in a lot of ways, and maybe the only way that they can be accepted is to be represented as a male, or to put themselves in a male guise to be accepted by that form of society, or to make that kind of connection. And similarly, from the father's point of view, does he have to put on that powerful, or have that ego, powerful nature to himself for him to feel accepted in the same society, in the circle? And the vulnerable nature can't be the one that's front facing in that way. There are lots of little moments here and there about power struggle and maybe living with patriarchy, how you have to act, or how a female especially has to exist in this world. The idea when somebody forced themselves on her that her only recourse was really to murder him or to take control physically of the situation is maybe a bit far-fetched and goes a bit far, but I think the underlying theme of it there was that, okay, the alternative was to take it on the chin or to somehow exist through it. It's not acceptable either. So, females are faced with hard choices, I think, in this world. And then we have the connection with the cars themselves. I mean, as she's pregnant and the pregnancy develops, obviously she's trying to hide from the other person that's involved here, and it becomes much more difficult to hide the bigger that she gets. And I think it just has to be said that a lot of the characters in the whole film, both male and female, spend a lot of the time of the film being naked. There's a lot of nakedness in this film, and there's got to be something to that. Obviously, you're representing, the nakedness to show the male and female form and show the differences between them, and also it only exacerbates the fact that this person is pregnant and they've got pregnant by a car or machine. But I think that again types into the idea that for some men, and this bears out, I think, in the end, that the female is only there as a machine to make babies or to play a function in life, and that plays out very closely towards the end. I think there's something really to be said for what happens in this film that really challenges that behaviour. I mean, the ending I think is quite stark and leaves you a bit hollow, even though it's one of the happiest kind of shot scenes in the film. I think it's really interesting in that regard. And you have this idea of acceptance. You know, for that person to truly feel loved at some stage, a lot of things had to happen. She was looking for a certain type or a certain thing from people that she wasn't necessarily getting beforehand, or maybe it was themselves that changed. Was it the motherhood? Was it the pregnancy that changed them? Or was it something else? There's a lot wrapped up in Titane. And like I say, I think Ducournau as a filmmaker is challenging. I think in some ways it can be challenging in the wrong ways, because I came away from Titane. Obviously, it's a film that I've thought a lot about. It's been about 4 or 5 days since I've seen it, and I'm not sure whether I can't wait to watch it again or I never want to see it again for a long time, because of the uncomfortable nature of the situation that it puts you in as the viewer. I'd be delighted to hear what other people thought of Titane. What else is at play here? Like, there's a lot. Every scene seems to have something in it that is trying to be said. And we've only scratched the surface of a lot of the ideas here, but I thought it was a film that needs and warrants discussion. And with that in mind, this is my contribution to that discussion. So if you have seen it, would love to have a conversation with you about it. Let me know what you think. Did you even like it? Like, you probably get my ideas. I'm kind of verging on I think I loved it, but I also struggled with watching it, because I think it's meant to be a struggling watch. Not just for the physical nature of it, but the themes that it represents to me as a male watching it, and the things that it challenges about me, and even about my relationship with the females and kids, etc. in my life. So if you made this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you again soon. Take care.